at the end of the day. Adonai Orivishi Mimira Adonai Orivishi Mimira Adonai Mosnaya Mimiesta Adonai Ori, Ori Veishi, Mimira, Mimira. Adonai Ori Vishi Mimira Adonai Ori Vishi Mimira Adonai Mostaya Mimiefra Adonai The Lord is my light and my help. Whom? What shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom? What shall I dread? These words of encouragement compose the opening verse of Psalm 27, a psalm that Jews add to our morning and evening worship from the first of Elul until the end of Sukkot, a total of 51 days. There are both clear and nuanced reasons for its addition during the penitential season, a time when we confront our deepest fears, our deepest longings, and our inevitable mortality. Within the Psalmodic canon, Psalm 27 falls into the category of what's known as a lament, defined as a poetic expression of a nation or individual lamenting some communal disaster. Both communal and individual laments in Scripture typically include similar elements, including, but not limited to, an address to God, a description of suffering, a petition for divine assistance, faith in God's receipt of prayer, and an anticipation of divine response. When the pleas of the psalmist are written in the first person, depending on the context, it's generally understood as an expression of an individual's personal experience that's actually reflective of something going on for the entire community. So the best example of this is the Song of the Sea, Exodus 15, which we recite every morning, but was first sung in celebration when all the Israelites crossed the Sea of Reeds from slavery to freedom. This is what it says. Then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song unto the Lord. And then they all sing, I will sing unto the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Horse and rider he is thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. So in that moment, each Israelite chanted in the first person as one whole, but it was undeniably a collective experience. Since I discovered the wonders in Psalms, and Psalm 27 in particular, when I have embraced this text in anticipation of the high holidays, it has always felt very personal to me. For instance, in the years after my mother died, I focused on verse 10. Ki aviva imi, ki azavuni, vadonai ya'asfeni. And that is, though my father and mother leave me, the Lord will care for me. This was an important recognition that those of us granted length of years will at some point lose their parents. And I found that very comforting. And then periods in my life when I've been deeply hurt and long to understand how to channel my pain into productive action, I've relied on verse 11, which says, "Teach me your way, O Lord. Guide me on the right path to cope with adversarial forces." This verse validated my feelings and offered assurance that my Jewish values could help be an arbiter of how I cope. But this year, it feels very different. My expressions of woe are many, and a cacophony of personal, communal, and global fears. I've actually not been sleeping well. In the last year, before COVID-19, I would often wake up with that bodily sensation that I'm late for an exam that I forgot to study for. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but trust me, that was my high school. And so let me just tell you a few of the things that are on my mind, for perhaps you can relate. I'm worried about my elderly parents, and I'm heartbroken that I can't fly to visit them right now. I was going every 2 months. I feel sad for my teenagers who should be hanging out with friends in high school and college, but instead are spending most of their time at home, unsure about what the future holds. I am in agony over the burning of the planet and the countless species of insect and animal life, not to mention flora and fauna, that have become extinct just in the last decade. I'm worried about the economy, which may still look okay on the surface, but is not as stable as it appears. And I know that the most vulnerable among us stand to suffer the most when the inevitable occurs. I am worried about climate migration. Where are people going to live now that some of America's most desirable residential areas are already or soon to be uninhabitable? I'm worried about all my friends who are sick, some of them terminally, that I cannot visit and whose hands I cannot hold. I'm worried about the hardworking farmers in Iowa that lost entire crops, 14 million acres of farmland destroyed in one day by a rare and deadly wind hurricane called a derecho, a word I've never even heard before. And then 2 months later, unprecedented hurricane level rains devastated large parts of that state. And those two stories barely made the news. Well, now that I'm more aware than ever of the daily fears experienced by people of color in this country, my heart breaks with news of every senseless killing that could have been avoided. I'm worried about dangerous, hateful conspiracy theories that have infected mainstream forms of public and social media. I'm worried about the inability of the uneducated voter to filter reasonable information about politicians and policies from flagrant falsehoods, thus supporting policies hurtful to them and their families. I'm worried because of the proliferation of firearms in the hands of people that have no professional need for them and may use them to hurt innocents because of inflamed hate and rage. I'm worried about the future of our fragile democracy. Oh, did I mention that we're living through a pandemic that has already killed nearly 1 million people worldwide? So I conducted a fairly superficial survey about what some of my colleagues spoke about over Rosh Hashanah. And interestingly enough, many sermons were about hope. Well, Lord knows we need some hope. As religious leaders, that is our job, to provide encouragement and eternal wisdom that lends perspective and inspires motivation to go on, even in the darkest times. So in an effort to offer true hope without sounding disingenuous, I turn to the opening verse of Psalm 27 for guidance. It says, "The Lord is my light and my help. What? Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. What or whom shall I dread?" Well, clearly I am so afraid of so many different things right now, and the networks of people perpetuating them, that for the last 40 days, I've been wrestling with this fundamental question. Is it possible for God to be our light and our help and the strength of our lives while we experience so much communal fear and dread? Well, perhaps the answer is in the psalm itself. Yes, God can be those things, but we must do our part to know who and what are the sources of fear and dread and be willing to face them head on. And throughout our history, Jewish response to tragedy really does reinforce this, Reed. Every monumental crisis that we have faced as a people has led to a necessary reinvention of how we understand and transform the 3 Bs that define Jewish identity in every age, and that is behavior, belief, and belonging. I want to give you some examples. When the first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE, and more than 85% of Jerusalem's Jews were exiled to Babel, they figured out how to keep Judaism alive without a temple by developing rituals that allowed us to remain Jewish in a host country where another religion was predominant. And in many ways, it did create a different sense of belonging that laid the groundwork for what would need to happen 600 years later when we'd lose the Second Temple. Throughout the Second Temple period, the Jewish community of Babylonian exiles was a diaspora stronghold that engaged in its own form of sophisticated connection to belief and practice, different than what was happening in Jerusalem. And when the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 CE, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had the presence of mind to curry favor enough with Emperor Vespasian that Vespasian allowed Yavne in the north of Israel to become the center of learning and law for the Jewish remnant. This complete re-envisioning of behavior and belief was the historical move that saved Judaism, and which is why we are on Zoom tonight in 2020. We should live to 2021. Throughout the nightmarish and bloody Middle Ages, including the Crusades, when Jews were regularly uprooted at minimum and sometimes slaughtered en masse, communities small and large did whatever they had to do. They found a place to relocate where they could live in safety, even if that was only for another 50 years. In the 16th century, the birth of Kabbalah, this complex way of thinking that introduced new rituals and approaches to text study that embraced our ancient mystical traditions, finally sort of brought them out from the hidden underground into the light, that emerged in the wake of the painful and brutal end of 500 glorious years of Spanish Jewry. And then 200 years later, in part because of how popular Kabbalah became, and Kabbalah changed the Jewish conversation everywhere, the Hasidic movement began to flourish in Eastern Europe. Now that was a new theology and way of worship that flew in the face of hierarchical Judaism that had become the defining character of Jewish life in Central and Western Europe. Hasidism provided a comforting response to the abject poverty that so many Jews were forced to endure for generations, answering the question, why would I want to live as a devout Jew if everyone hates us and all we do is suffer? It's a good question. And then again in the 1940s, after the unimaginable destruction of 1,000+ years of European Jewish life and culture that flourished even in some of the darkest pockets of hostile countries, through fountains of tears and incalculable losses, courageous people made the state of Israel a reality. The birth of a sovereign Jewish state in modern times provided additional avenues for Jewish behavior, belief, and belonging. So different, in fact, that American Jews and Israeli Jews often struggle to understand each other's Judaisms. A full century of acceptance and widespread assimilation has done a number on Jewish behavior, belief, and belonging in North America. Prior to and the decades after World War II, the American synagogue flourished as a place for Jews to worship, socialize, and be able to live the full expression of their heritage. But as our behaviors became more American, with soccer prioritized over religious education, and overall distancing from regular prayer and practice, belonging has started to look really different. For some people, a JCC membership or an organizational affiliation like to Hadassah or Mazon, or even involvement with organizations like AIPAC, these organizations are divorced from the rhythms of Jewish calendar and regular study and observance in any significant way. And yet this is their full extent of Jewish belonging. It's not bad. It just is. But with the advent of COVID-19 and the explosion of opportunities for virtual engagement, the Jewish world has come together in some stunning ways. More people are worshiping online than have ever gathered in person. Jews from all over the world can now take classes in all things Jewish from preeminent yeshivot and schools in Israel and elsewhere. Two examples of countless, but more than 7,000 people attended Ikar's High Holiday service. Ikar is a sort of a young congregation in LA that attracts a younger demographic and is very politically engaged. 7,000 people watched their services. And as of Friday morning, more than 10,000 people had watched Rabbi Angela Buchdahl's sermon offered on day one Rosh Hashanah at Central Synagogue. And I mean, these synagogues, Park Avenue, sometimes I go on there on a Saturday morning and 2,000 people are watching. Come on. So imagine the possibilities here. With genetic testing kits like 23andMe, hundreds of thousands of people are learning every year that they actually have Jewish ancestry. Well, if even 10% of people that make that discovery decide that they want to learn more about Judaism and all it has to offer is a religion, a culture, and a peoplehood, as of summer 2020, the opportunities for where to learn more is in an open, accessible community are plentiful. It used to be when you want to Google something Jewish 3 years ago, 10 years ago, you could find things, but it was usually offered by Chabad, which was the first organization to understand that they had to put things on the web because people were seeking them from all over the world. And that's all they had was the internet. And my hat's off to them for, having that vision so early, but now everything's accessible. So people living in remote areas can enjoy the gamut of Jewish worship opportunities in Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Renewal, and emergent communities. While it's different than in person, online communities have been able to foster a new kind of belonging for people looking for a Jewish home, especially those who are homebound or don't feel comfortable driving at night. Online learning opportunities are helping shape more sophisticated Jewish belief systems. Countless Jewish resource websites are helping eager people learn how to make Shabbat and celebrate holidays. For the first time in years, I have great hope for the future of Judaism worldwide. There, I said it. I do have hope for something, and I really do. Now, granted, on the list of problems that keep me up at night, none of them had anything to do with the future of the Jewish people. But the amount of good that we as a people can affect in the world is not incidental. As I understand my tradition, to live a full Jewish life is to exercise compassion and advocate for justice on behalf of all peoples. As I understand my sacred texts, we were placed on this earth to care for nature and work with it, not to abuse the land for our own personal gain and pleasure. So now it's our job to utilize all the scientific knowledge and tools we have to heal it. And it's no accident that some of the greatest work in this area is being done in Israel. As I understand my tradition, we must support efforts to rid the world of disease and bloodshed. This, my friends, is what the Jewish people have been doing since we received the Torah on Mount Sinai. Machzor Lev Shalem, which is the Machzor that came out about 6 or 7 years ago in the conservative movement, maybe more, includes in the Martyrology service a poem by American poet Charles Reznikoff, who sees the Jewish people as aspiring to transform the evil of the world into the work of redemption. Here it is. Out of the strong, sweetness. Out of the dead body of the Lion of Judah, the prophecies and the Psalms. Out of the slaves of Egypt, out of the wandering tribesmen of the deserts and the peasants of Palestine, out of the slaves of Babylon and Rome, out of the ghettos of Spain and Portugal, Germany and Poland, the Torah and the prophecies, the Talmud and the sacred studies, the hymns and the songs for Jews. and out of the Jewish dead of Belgium and Holland, of Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria, of France, Italy, Yugoslavia, of Lithuania and Latvia, White Russia and Ukraine, of Czechoslovakia and Austria, Poland and Germany, out of the greatly wronged, a people teaching and doing justice. Out of the plundered, a generous people. Out of the wounded, a people of physicians. And out of those who met only with hate, a people of love, a compassionate people. Like every people, Jews make mistakes. As individuals, we have faults, and many of us are less than saintly. But as Reznikov captured in his poem, time and time again, the Jewish people as a collective have been able to turn tragedy into goodness, making life-changing contributions to every aspect of human life wherever they have lived. And in that light, we are left with no choice but to mean what we say at the end of Psalm 27. Lulei ha'amati l'rot betuv Adonai be'eretz chayim, kavei el Adonai, chazak v'yametz libecha, v'kavei el Adonai. Mine is the faith that I surely shall see the Lord's goodness in the land of the living. Hope in the Lord and be strong. Take courage and hope in the Lord. You're not alone.
Yeah.
It's okay. You're not alone. I'm with you. I'm lonely too. What's that song that can't be sung by two? A broken home, a broken heart, isolated and afraid. Open up, this is a rain. I want to get it through to you. You're not alone. You're not alone. Every night I stand in your place. Every tear on every face is the same. A broken dream, a broken heart, isolated and afraid. Open up, this is a rain. I'm gonna get through to you. You're not alone. you. You're not alone. I'm gonna get it.